Okay, so good evening, everybody. Glad to be back with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces, as Dottie mentioned, and a couple of new faces too, which is always exciting. If I haven't met you before, I'm Kenny Sholes. I live here in Poolesville, and for the last 2 years or so, I've been trying to get out across the Ag Reserve and kind of explore local history, mainly through old houses, but also just, kind of digging into the people that came before us and some of the interesting stories that have taken place on this land. And tonight, what I wanted to do was focus a little bit on a couple of kind of questions that I've had along the way that I've been able to at least partially answer through the use of old maps, because there are actually a bunch of old maps from the Ag Reserve that are quite useful in kind of marking things that have transpired or where certain places were that are no longer there today. And so it's kind of interesting to take a look back and think about kind of what was here and get an appreciation for how this landscape and this land has changed over time. The maps kind of provide this point in time reference that we can look back on and see how things have evolved. So I love looking at old maps. I love looking at all maps, but especially old ones. And we are pretty lucky here in the Ag Reserve in the sense that there are quite a number of old maps that were very well done that we can go back to for reference. What I always think is kind of funny is because this area in the Ag Reserve and around Poolesville was so heavily occupied by Union troops during the Civil War, we actually have quite a bit of maps and other historic records from the 1860s. And to a certain extent, I feel like we actually know more about the Ag Reserve in the 1860s than we do, in the 1880s or 1890s, just because there was so much records being taken back then. But you can see here, this is just kind of a snapshot of, maps that I've frequently kind of turned to get a sense of what's taken place here, on this landscape. And as I was just saying, you can see there's a couple of maps there from the 1860s. There's actually quite a bit more. But what we have here is from the early 1860s through today, a relatively frequent updating of maps of this land. But once we get to about the 1950s timeframe, we can actually start using overhead satellite imagery, which I'll show you in a couple of slides, which is also, even more helpful in helping us get a sense of, these snapshots in time to see how the ground has actually changed beneath us. So I wanted to just, before I dive into a couple of specific examples here, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted just a few, two maps that I think are really important and noteworthy. And they are probably the most often cited historic maps here in the Ag Reserve. The first is the Martinet and Bond map from 1865. So this is a map that covers all of Montgomery County. But what's awesome about it is it's in the Library of Congress holdings online, and you can pull it up and you can zoom way in. So you can see kind of that snapshot around Poolesville there that I've kind of blown up for you to see. Simon Martinet was the surveyor for the city of Baltimore. So that was actually his primary job. And then at some point in the 1860s, he decided to go around the state of Maryland mapping its counties. And he actually did such a good job that when the Maryland state legislature saw his maps, they mandated that his maps be used in the schools throughout the state. So he instantly became quite popular for these maps. This is, the Martinet and Bond map of Montgomery County. And again, we're able to zoom in. And what's so great about this map is he has not only laid out the roads and a lot of the water features throughout the area and the names of the towns, but he's also, as you can see kind of in that blown up portion, highlighted the locations of where certain individuals have their homes. And this is really useful for people like me later on when I'm trying to get a sense of where a house might have been that's no longer there, or maybe who owned the property in a certain year. And just as an example here, if you look at the blown up map on the left-hand side, you see kind of the that crossroads there, and you see the name Henry Young. So Henry Young is the individual who built East Oaks in 1829. So, you know, I know for a fact that that dot is East Oaks underneath Henry Young's name. And this intersection is the intersection of Whites Ferry Road, and then it's where Waishi and Edwards Ferry Road intersect. So it's useful to have these names just because it really kind of helps us tie the past to the landscape as it stands today. And then the Hopkins Atlas is the second map that is, I think, frequently utilized. And Hopkins here in 1879 has done something, you know, very similar to Martinet, where he's actually mapped out the roads in even more detail than Martinet, and put even more names on the map of residents in the area. And, you know, one of the things I'm not sure of, I suspect that maybe people paid him money to have their names on the maps. You'll see that some names are bigger than others. So I don't know if he had like a certain sliding scale for pricing for how he determined, you know, what names to kind of make more prominent on the map. But again, really, really helpful to give us a sense of who was where back in 1879. And a lot of times what I'll actually do is use these two maps together to figure out when a house was built. So there's a lot of houses here that were built between 1865 and 1879. And it's really easy to tell because they don't show up on the 1865 map and they are there on the 1879 map. So it's a useful way of kind of measuring when things were put into place in the first place. All right, so I think I saw Jim Poole on here, and about a year ago, he sent me some pictures. You can see two of them on the right side of your screen there, of an old section of River Road that essentially had been abandoned. And, you know, this is the kind of thing that just interests me for reasons that I don't quite understand. But I, you know, was fascinated with this idea that there was this section of River Road that we don't use anymore and is just kind of overgrown. And where is that? And it didn't take long to figure out that it's basically, it connects through. So if you're on River Road coming up, let me go to the next slide because this might be easier. If you're on River Road here coming up towards Poolesville, and you pass Hughes Road on your right, then you pass West Willard, and you get to like the Summit Farm area, you're forced now to kind of turn right and go uphill on Mount Nebo Road. Well, you used to be able to keep going straight. So River Road used to connect all the way through up to Edwards Ferry Road. And it's interesting to me that that's no longer the case, only because that portion of the road is very, very old, right? So this part of River Road was initially laid out in the 1770s. So it's been with us for a long time. It was originally kind of referred to as the Sugarland Road. And it, you know, I would assume that that connection to Edwards Ferry in the 1800s was quite important, you know, given that there was a lot of warehouses, and, you know, it was a kind of a terminus point for the C&O Canal. It was also a ferry across to Virginia. So there was a lot of, you know, you can imagine a lot of crops being kind of pushed into the Edwards Ferry area. And so having this road open was, you know, certainly important. And, you know, my assumption is that eventually, and I'll show you kind of when this took place, the need for this road, which was always probably a dirt road or farm road, but the need for it kind of just slowly went away. And so one of the questions that I've had is, well, when did that happen? Like, when did it kind of drop off the maps, right? So when we look at a map from 1862, so this was a map associated with the Civil War. So it was engineers, part of the Union Army, that actually made this map. We can see kind of in that red box, that's around the section of road that is no longer with us. So that's the part of River Road that connects up to Edwards Ferry that has since disappeared. And then when we look again here in the 1860s, I just think this map is beautiful, but you can see that section there again is being shown, and it no longer exists. This map is a really nice map. It was actually made with a focus on Loudoun County, Virginia. So there's a lot of really, if you're interested in old maps and you want to see some really great ones of the Ag Reserve, one of the kind of tricks I've figured out is to look for maps of Loudoun County. And because of the way the Ag Reserve kind of has this horseshoe bend in the Potomac River, we end up getting covered on a lot of those maps. So there's a lot of really great old maps if you look for Loudoun County and not for Montgomery County. So just a little tip there for those of you interested in looking them up yourself. Okay, and so then here's that that Hopkins Atlas map that I was talking about, and you can see, the section of road is clearly there. And what I want to point out here is you can see this name, this resident, Joseph White. So Joseph White owned this home, Mount Nebo, at this point in time. And I mentioned this actually in the last talk, but it's interesting. Oliver Wendell Holmes, who went on to become a Supreme Court justice, was in this area. He was fighting in the Civil War. He was from a Massachusetts unit, and he was stationed in this area. And we know that he likely walked up and down this old section of River Road because, as I mentioned previously, he has a number of diary entries writing back to his mother. And in one of them, he actually talks about being at the home of Joseph White. And he says, yeah, he was a successor, which was, he had Southern sympathies. So he was with, the Confederate sympathies. But he treated us well, and he fed us goose and ice cream at his home. So I just think that's interesting to think about, a future Supreme Court justice in this area, maybe walking down this old abandoned section of River Road. I'd also point out that I think it was shortly after that he fought in the Battle of Ball's Bluff and was significantly wounded, probably should have died, and somehow survived that wound to go on and do, amazing things, obviously. But yeah, so you can see it here, and it's just it's fascinating that this here in 1879, the road's very much still with us. When we look in 1909, we can see that still it's being portrayed in maps. So clearly it still is serving some function, some reason to continue to exist. And then in the 50s, we start seeing it kind of disappear. This is, as I mentioned, when we get to the 1950s, we start having the ability to use kind of overhead imagery, which is just an awesome capability to have. And you can see here, I mean, like I said, this road was likely always a dirt road, always kind of a farm road. So I don't think it was ever this, substantial. It wasn't I-270, right? But you can see it kind of starting to fade into the landscape here in the 50s, probably just from lack of use. Still covering it in the 50s. This is a tax survey map from 1956. And you can see this picture that Jim provided, which is really cool, of the road. And I believe it's where the road is crossing over the Cabin Creek branch here, which is kind of this little creek that runs up from the Potomac across this road. So that's probably what that section is showing there in that picture. But then by the time we get to the 70s, this is overhead from the 70s, the road has pretty much all but disappeared in this upper section, right? So it's basically gone. And in the lower section, kind of the most southern portion of it has kind of just turned into, I think, some farmlands that were being used by, there's an old Chiswell property up here, probably being used as part of that. But so you can see, I mean, the road has essentially kind of gone away. And, I don't think that there's any, a road being abandoned and kind of being returned to nature, I find less issue with than an old house like that we lose. But it is just kind of interesting to think about some of these things that were here before us that are no longer there. And I'll tell you, I've been out from Edwards Ferry into the woods here to try to see if there's any clear kind of path that looks like maybe there was a road here before, and you really can't see anything. I mean, it's amazing how quickly just nature kind of takes hold of things. So it's largely gone, but at one point was certainly an important point of transit here in the Ag Reserve that kind of outlived its time frame of relevance and is now just kind of returned back to the countryside. So another thing that I've been looking at, and if you're on the Poolesville Now and Then page, you might have seen I had a question about this the other day, which I got some really interesting answers to. If you're out on Martinsburg Road, there is this gate on the side of the road, and it's clearly kind of the entrance to what looks like it used to be a driveway. This is kind of the overhead shot. And so Martinsburg Road running here across the top, where I took the picture is kind of where the orange dot is looking down. You can see what used to be kind of like a tree line driveway there. And then this kind of weird landscape here. What this is it's right across the street from the Dickerson energy plant or power plant. This is those large mounds of, I believe, where they're kind of burying the coal ash there. And so this gate with this driveway is right next to those structures. So when I was about 6 or 7, I remember going for a ride with my dad through a lot of these country roads, as we did very frequently. And there was one particular time where I have like glimpses of us stopping at the entrance to this really long driveway. It had this huge log laying across it, kind of, clearly to keep people out. I think we've passed the statute of limitations, so I can probably speak openly about it. And I remember walked down the driveway and checked out this really, really cool old house. And, we just took a look at it and walked back and left. But it was so long ago, and both of us have forgotten where that was or what house that was. And we've driven around previously kind of trying to get a sense of like, where was that we saw that house? And we've never gotten a sense. I have a strong suspicion that the reason we've never been able to re-find it is because it's no longer with us. And I think it was probably this house. And so I've been kind of interested in trying to understand what was at the end of this driveway and who lived there. So I've been kind of spending some time using maps and using overhead imagery to try to get a sense of what was down here at the end of this driveway. So a place to start, and this is always a good place to start when you're looking for answers of who's been here in the Ag Reserve, is to go back to that Martinet and Bond map from 1865. And what you're looking at here is kind of the red area is the general area where that Martinsburg Road kind of goes through. Obviously, it's not here in 1865. Maybe it hasn't been put down yet. It's also possible that Martinet just didn't kind of record some of those more minor roads. But we can see that the Trundles and the Shreves are two really kind of well-to-do families in this area. They had a number of different properties. You can see their names kind of throughout this section of the map. And they are kind of across the street from what I'm showing there, which is Inverness. So Inverness is the home out in Dickerson where members of the prominent White family came from. Inverness is the home right by the blinking yellow light at Dickerson. That turn, everybody kind of knows that landmark. So that blinking yellow light here would be, if you see this kind of 4-way intersection of roads kind of in the center towards the top of the map, that's, I believe, where that would have been. And so we're, kind of trying to zero in on where was this house with the gate and who owned it. And I think it's, somewhere here in this red box. And then what I was looking at was, is there anything close to this home that can tie us way back into history to give me a sense of where it might sit on the map? And kind of lucky for me and my interest is that due south of the home, so this is the home up here up top at the end of, or what was the home at the end of this driveway. And down here at the bottom of the map is the Edward Chiswell farmhouse. Edward Chiswell, he fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War. And after the war, bought this property. You can see, it's a really cool looking farmhouse built in kind of 3 different sections throughout the early to mid and late 1800s. but the home is still with us, right? It's still there. I mean, this picture was taken a year ago. And so what that helps me do is then understand, okay, if I know that the Edward Chiswell house is still with us, I can look at that on the Hopkins Atlas map. I can pinpoint where that house is on the map. I know that I need to move due north to find this other kind of structure that was there. And the Hopkins Atlas map is really weird because it's kind of turned 90 degrees. So north kind of goes this way. And so due north of Chiswell is Dr. Charles Shreve, right? So my strong belief is that it was his house, and that maybe that house was not yet built in the 1860s when we were looking at the prior map. But I think that's whose home it was. And then the question is, well, what happened to it, right? So here's where we can kind of start diving into some of the overhead imagery to get a sense of what has taken place. And so when we look at the end of this long driveway in 1993, we can see that, you know, in that red box there, we have this kind of house from above, kind of is in the form of, or in the shape of like a cross. So it's very much there in the 90s. We can see kind of to the left that, you know, the ground is starting to be kind of prepped for those mounds with the ash, it looks like to me. So, you know, something is kind of taking place here, but the house is still there. But then when we jump to 1998, what we see is the house is gone, right? All we have here is like the foundation. So the house has clearly been knocked over. We have kind of the foundation remaining. It looks like it's been filled in. And what we have to the left is, you know, continued work from at that point, I think it was Pepco, building this, you know, ash waste facility over here. So from that, we know that this home was probably built sometime between 1865 and 1879 and knocked down sometime between 1993 and 1998, right? And then once we have that information, what's kind of great about Poolesville and the Ag Reserve and social media is we can kind of crowdsource some answers to get a better sense of what's taken place, right? We have so many residents around here that have been here forever and have deep ties into the past. So that's where sites like Poolesville Now and Then are really useful. So I can pose that question and put these pictures on there, which I did the other day. And pretty quickly, I have somebody reaching out saying, yeah, my grandfather owned that house, individual by the name of Dan Westland. He owned it until I think the late 70s. He sold it to Pepco. And Pepco kind of, I don't know if they tried to kind of restore it or try to keep it in place or what, but in the mid 1990s, decided that basically it was just, there was no sense in keeping the structure up, so they removed it, right? So that's basically what happened to the home. And once I found that out, it was interesting to learn that this facility here off to the left, where they're kind of storing the coal ash, is called the Westland Coal Ash Storage Facility, right? So it's literally named after kind of the owner of the property from which Pepco bought it. So we don't have the complete picture. You know, what I'm looking for now is, are there any pictures of this house, right? I'd love to see, you know, some photos of it. So if any of you have links into the Dickerson area and perhaps have any old shots of this, I would love to see them. But that's kind of like the next step in this continuing work to figure out what was there and try to kind of pull it back from the dead a little bit so that we have a sense of the structure and can start piecing together kind of the chain of ownership from that initial Dr. Shreve to, you know, Dan Westland in the 1970s, right? So that's the kind of thing that I'm just personally interested and fascinated in. And then kind of sticking in that area, I've also been kind of looking to see what has taken place in Dickerson as a result of the power plant kind of being built there, and their you know, their footprint has expanded over the years. I don't know that it's continuing to expand, but certainly it takes up quite a bit of real estate on the Potomac River up there in Dickerson. And with kind of that coal ash facility across the street, in addition to, I think, some of the recycling plant associated facilities, you know, there's a lot of land being utilized by this facility. And so one of the things I've been kind of interested in is trying to figure out what was here before the plant got here, right? And it's a little tricky because the Dickerson power plant was actually built in the 50s. So it's, you know, as far as kind of power plants go, it's quite old, and we don't have, you know, as I said, we don't have a whole lot of good overhead imagery before it was built to get a better sense of kind of what was there. Obviously, we have some maps, we have a couple of snapshots from above, but we're kind of working off, you know, very, very little evidence. So this is kind of an overhead shot of the facility in 2018. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor when I move it, but if you can, this is kind of the road up, like if you're headed towards Frederick, I guess this is Darnestown Road, it's considered. The blinking yellow light would be right here. And then you make that turn to go into Dickerson up in the very like top right side of the picture. So the power plant there is obviously right on the river. You can see kind of the those coal ash kind of mounds at the very bottom left of the picture, and then some of that recycling plant stuff kind of towards the center and the bottom. So, you know, quite a bit of land here that is taken up from this facility. And then if we do, this is from the exact same elevation, just from 1951. So we go back about 70 years and look at the same spot on the map. You can see that we have quite a bit of structures kind of in that area where the power plant was. You can, you know, very clearly see Darnestown Road here with that, you know, 90-degree turn. You can see the Dickerson quarries up here in the north, which we can talk about that someday too. That's an interesting place. But clearly there's cleared farmland here where the power plant went into play, right? So immediately we kind of know we've probably lost some structures as a result of this power plant. And then when we go back and again start with the Martinet and Bond map from 1865, we're seeing all these, you know, structures kind of pinpointed on the map in the area where the power plant, you know, has taken shape, right? So we have a good sense that there were people there and farms there and homesteads there and whatnot. And then here's essentially kind of that same cut of the map, but from 1879. Again, you can kind of see that Dr. Shreve house I was just talking about kind of falls into this area. And then, you know, a bunch of areas up here around the river clearly were, you know, no longer viable as homes once the power plant came in. So then just to kind of zoom in a little bit. So this is kind of a tighter shot, again, from 2018 of the power plant here. And then if we kind of compare that to the same elevation from the 1950s, it's a little bit easier to see that, you know, there's at least probably 4 or 5 homes that were kind of removed as a result of this construction. Possibly could have been more, I'm not sure. One of the old homes that like has a lot of mystery to it is this stone house you see on the right. This is it's just labeled as the Shreve house. It's quite small to be honest with you, it looks to me more like an enslaved quarters than it does a residence. I have no evidence of that. I've been trying to dig in to learn more about that. But unfortunately, you know, these structures are just kind of gone. And because it is a secured kind of energy plant, I don't have the ability to just climb the barbed wire fence and go, poking around in there. So it's a little bit more of a tricky area on the map to kind of get more details about. This picture of this chimney on the left is from a farmstead, and it's out in the woods, and you actually can still access this. This is not within the power plant kind of confines. I've been out there with my 7-year-old. There are some old trails that I think used to be a driveway that you can get out there with. I don't think the chimney is still there. There are some old sheds and stuff out there, but largely, as you can see, I mean, that picture is from the 70s, and already we have we have nature kind of taking its toll on these sites pretty quickly once they no longer have residents in them. Okay, and then the final one that I wanted to just show is the Poolesville streetscape. And I know people are always kind of interested in looking at this and thinking about this, as am I. I came across this picture recently, which I just think is really cool because I hadn't seen it. I've seen a lot of old pictures of Poolesville, and I hadn't seen this one before. Online, it said it was from 1920. You can see underneath that writing there on the picture, it looks like it says 49. So I think maybe it's more recent than 1920. But regardless, it's kind of a cool shot. It's this picture was taken as if you were standing kind of right in the middle of Fisher Avenue next to the Old Town Hall, looking down towards like Whalen Commons. That's where this shot is taken. So it's kind of an interesting vantage point. It's in some ways that's changed a lot, right? Obviously, how open this is, and you see kind of the tree line section of Fisher straight ahead. But in other ways, like you can almost, it's pretty clear where this was taken, right? It's pretty easy to recognize. It still kind of slopes downhill like it did then. So just kind of an interesting picture to take a look at. And I always just like to kind of see how this area and how this town was kind of portrayed through time. And so when we look in 1865, you can see that Poolesville is, according to Martinet here, quite literally just a kind of a crossroads, right? With a number of structures and homes here. Just to point a few out, so where you see M.E. Church, so that is the thrift shop, right? The white building there, right kind of in the center of town. Where you see Baptist Church, that is the dry cleaners in town on Fisher, that kind of yellow structure that used to be a church structure. If you look at it, you can tell it used to be a church. It's easy to pass by without noticing. And then Matthews is the family that lived at Chiswell's Inheritance, kind of if you're driving towards Bellsville out on the left. They were there in 1865, so that's why you see their name on the structure at that point in time. And then Martinet took it kind of a step further and really spent some time diving into who was living here in town at that time, which is just kind of awesome to have as a record. What I've tried to do is just show that a lot of the structures here in 1865 are very much still with us and easy to recognize, which is, I think, pretty interesting in and of itself. You can see that kind of that old Coxon Road, which was, where the Old Town Hall is. There used to be that split. That's what you're seeing there. That's what's taking place. As I mentioned, that old photo I showed at the beginning of this, I think it was taken kind of right here, right next to that split in the roads. But yeah, this map just gives you a really great sense of the people that were here, who was doing what, the different kinds of, shops that were existing. You can see there's a blacksmith shop right on what is now Fisher Avenue, kind of towards the center of town. The post office down here across the street from like where the pool is, which is kind of fascinating to think. I don't know how it ended up down there. So just kind of a fun map to look at and think about. And when you really think about how much has the layout of town changed, I mean, it really hasn't changed that much, right? We've certainly added to it, but it's really just been an addition to. We haven't changed really the layout or structure of the way the town is laid out. And if we look in 1879, and again, the Hopkins map is kind of turned 90 degrees, right? But you can see that I think as you look at it, it's actually pretty easy to recognize Poolesville pretty quickly. If you understand that this road kind of going off to the right is the road actually going north towards Bellsville. So if you're going towards the top of the map, you'd be going towards White's Ferry. And if you're going to the left, you'd be going down towards Edwards Ferry. And then this going to the bottom of the map would be what they always said, going towards Rockville, right? But you can see here kind of the beginning of Wooten Avenue, which runs parallel to Fisher. This is, I forget the name of the road. I want to say like, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's that little small side street that kind of connects Wooten to Fisher, right across from where the like the little fitness gym is. And then you can see kind of the outlines of that old Coxon's Road down here. In the center down here is what we would now refer to as Whalen Commons. And just to show, like, I think this kind of like structure in the center of town kind of holds true from, you know, the 1870s all the way through to today. So if we look in the 1950s at overhead, you can see we are certainly growing, more properties are coming into place, but for the most part, this kind of general layout structure holds true, right? And then when we jump into today, into 2018, I mean, obviously we have, you know, anybody who, I've said it before, but anybody who says that nothing changes in Poolesville or whatever is, you know, just show them this change, right? 1951 to 2018, massive change, massive growth. You can see all of these developments on the outskirts of Poolesville, but really at the center of town, right, we still have this shape, right? It still is kind of like the nucleus of town in the way that it's laid out. Our businesses kind of reside around that main strip, the residents kind of around the edges. And then as we've kind of continued to expand, we've just kind of grown outwards from there. So just kind of a, you know, an interesting look to see that, you know, I guess the answer to my initial question, how much has the streetscape really changed? I don't think it's that much. I think we've added to it. I think, you know, the roads are longer and there's more people, and the further out you get, there's still more homes. Whereas, you know, in the 1950s, once you left town, you were kind of in the middle of nowhere. But for the most part, we look somewhat the same if you're standing in the center of town. So just, you know, something to keep in mind. So with that, I'm open for any and all questions, and I'm happy to answer anything.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And I'd also like to just take a quick moment to thank our featured gold sponsor for this event, Jim Brown and Turning Point Real Estate. Sponsors like Jim really, you know, allow Poolesville seniors to put on amazing events like this one. So thank you so much, and thank you, Kenny, as well. Do we have any questions either in the chat, or now you can feel free to unmute and ask them as well?
Kenny, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
So the area behind like Charlie Glass's old shop, the old John's Video, kind of south of Gail Lee's house, I see a significant footprint of a Pleasance family.
Yeah.
In typical Poolesville fashion, you typically get a street named after a family or something like that. But they kind of disappear. I know obviously there's Pleasance Excavating within Montgomery County, and they're obviously a pretty powerful company. They're from Southeast Virginia, according to some friends I know. But do you know more about that family?
So it's funny you bring that up, because I was thinking that myself earlier, because they are they have a sizable footprint kind of in around Poolesville, but even as you expand outwards, you'll see Pleasance everywhere. And it is interesting because I don't know a lot about them. They don't seem to show up in a whole lot of records. I think that there's a story of a kind of famous story you might have heard before, but where at Kilmaine 2, which is an old house out on Wayshe Road, there was a guy in the 1800s who attempted to build his own wings and fly, and he jumped off the roof. Glenn, hopefully so Glenn just said Basil Brook Pleasance. I may be correct here. I think maybe that's who it is.
That's him.
That's him? Yeah. So Glenn, jump in and correct me if I get it wrong, but my understanding is he had this kind of crazy idea if he would build his own wings, jump off the roof and fly.
Yep.
And he built the wings and he jumped off the roof, but he didn't fly. And I think he like broke both of his legs or something. And that's like always, that's the only story I know about the Pleasance, which is unfortunate because I'm sure the family doesn't love that that's what we're talking about 100 years later. But yeah, that's the only thing that I can that comes to mind when I think about them.
They are actually one of the oldest families in Monocacy Cemetery.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We assume that they were buried on their family farm, much like the Shreves and the Trundles. And those cemeteries, they were either disinterred and brought over to Monocacy Cemetery, or they were plowed under.
Right. That's the other thing about the power plant that's unclear, right, Glenn, is that we think there was likely some burials that were potentially pulled on top of.
Definitely. We have the at least 4 of the Shreve family and 4 of the Trundle family members at Monocacy Cemetery right now.
Okay.
With the original stones.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Kenny, hi, it's Stan Fisher. Back in 1776 or so, just after we became Montgomery County, my great-great-great-grandfather, Martin Fisher, bought some property just south of Edwards Ferry Road, near where Mount Nebo is. You can see his name on the 1851 map. He bought a piece of, I guess, a patent called backland. How do I find out I have a description of it that starts with an old oak tree and goes down to the creek bed.
Yeah, I've seen this.
How can I find out where backland is?
That's a good question. We could run some searches. Sometimes, like, it's hard to know. Yeah, Montgomery Planning has some old maps that we could look at. But sometimes what we'll see is when we look, you can go onto Maryland SStat, which is like basically the property records. And if you look up addresses of old homes, not that I've ever done this, you a lot of times will come up with the property records and it'll actually still have the original survey name attached to it. So you can get a sense of kind of where it was on land. So that could be one place if there's some old homes in the area to take a look at. And then we might have to like maybe dig into some archives in Montgomery County to take a look. But
And what was that source where we could find the address of the house? I've never seen the address of
well, that's the thing, is we would have to figure out like where that house was, or if there's an old house in that area that we could kind of start with. But I'll take a look at it. Are you on Facebook, or can you, if you send me a note, I'll try to.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
well, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. And Amy mentioned using census records.
Yeah.
We might be able to, although census is tricky in the 1800s because it's largely just kind of numbers. So I don't know. We could certainly dig into that as well.
Okay, thanks.
This is Dolores, Kenny, and Stan. I've had some luck using newspapers.com. And also that's not free, but there are still some prehistoric newspaper sites, and it's surprising what you can find there. In terms of news stories about a business or a landowner.
Yep, I actually have an account to that, so I'll take a look there as well. I agree. You can find a lot of really cool stuff in there.
What were the newspapers back before 1851?
Well, so the Baltimore Sun covered a lot of this area.
Oh.
And then I don't know if the Sentinel was quite that old, but the Sentinel goes back quite a ways from, I guess, from Rockville.
1860, I think.
Yeah.
Archives, we're on archives.
But yeah, newspapers.com is pretty useful because you can kind of target the search in a year bracket and then look for certain keywords. And I've had a lot of luck using that.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, so sorry, my internet's not strong enough to upload the video too, but Kenny, I was curious when you showed the Old River Road section.
Yeah.
I had a friend several years ago who went biking somewhere down there, and he told me about finding the Old River Road and that there's a cemetery back there.
So I know what he's talking about. I'm gonna hold on, see if I'll mess this up, but I'm gonna try to share my screen one time and I'll show you where that is. So yes, there is a cemetery, and Glenn, I'm assuming we're going to be thinking the same thing here, but if you know where Edwards Ferry is, let's see.
Yep.
So this is probably the best one. So if you Edwards Ferry here is kind of right, if you can see my cursor at the very top of like this red box.
Yep.
Old River Road it's like a gravel road that continues parallel to the C&O towpath past Edwards Ferry. So it actually kind of can connect Edwards Ferry up to White's Ferry. About, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile down this road past Edwards Ferry, there is an old cemetery on the left. It's It's just in the woods. You really have to know what you're looking for. And it's a very old cemetery. They're all old stones from
Property.
1776, and from even older. But Glenn, do you have more on that?
Trying to find, I hate myself right now for not remembering the name. Hindle,
For burial purposes.
Dickerson.
We'll have to look.
Yeah,
One second here. It's Hickman
yeah, Hickman.
Cemetery. It is the oldest recorded cemetery in Montgomery County. And one second here, I'm going to give you the link to it. There you go. And it's literally just in the woods. The stones are basically deteriorating into the earth. There's a few fragments of it left over that you can visit. I don't recommend visiting it anytime other than the dead of winter, because it is marshland and it is full of snakes. But anyway, not a lot to see there. You can see basically everything that's there in that PDF file, that link I just gave you.
Yeah,
that's pretty much all you need to see. Otherwise, it's impossible to find on your own. But anyway, it's that. Just historically, it's the oldest one that we recorded in the cemetery inventory in Montgomery County.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because like I mentioned, I know this section of the road was laid out in the 1770s, and that's at least one of those stones is from 1776. Right. So I don't know.
I have a feeling it was that you showed the one map from the Loudoun County map, which showed the farmlands across the river on the Montgomery County side. This is one of those farmlands. The Hickmans had farmed it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a cool spot to check out.
You can't see them.
Okay. Okay, can you go back to that? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Not sharing anymore.
That's okay. You want to see this one?
The one you had, we were talking about earlier about River Road.
Yeah.
Right at the corner of your photograph is where the Martin Fisher property and backlands is located that we were talking about earlier.
Down in the bottom left, or
no, upper left on your photograph.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Yep.
Martin Fisher. That's my fifth great grandfather.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to take a look into that. That's kind of fascinating. I know the Fishers, have there's quite a few Fishers on the map in this area.
Yeah, I'm gonna figure out whether they're all related to me or not. I'm not sure.
Is it Martin Thomas Fisher?
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Junior, I think.
That's Martin Fisher Jr. and his son was Thomas Martin Fisher.
There you go. He's buried at Monocacy Cemetery.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that'd be a good starting spot.
Thomas Martin is?
Thomas Martin is buried in Monocacy.
Or Martin.
You know that there's a LaRue map that's 1960. It has sort of like the Martinet and Bond map. Have anybody seen that one?
I haven't seen that. I would like to see it though. Huh.
I think the Medley people have one there in their archives.
Okay.
In John Poole House.
Okay. I'll have to take a look.
But it's just of Upper Montgomery County, what we're looking at.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's, to be frank, that's the area that I care about. So.
And there's a nice article written by New York Times in 1861. A reporter was trying to get from Washington to Edwards Ferry. And he said, once you pass what's now Partnership Road, it turned into like a cart path.
Mm.
The farmers had a strange way of farming back then. Instead of building fences on each side of the road, they just put a gate across it. So if you were traveling up River Road, you'd have to get out and open the gate, go through it, close the gate, and go to the next gate. And on that closed section, just before you get to Edwards Ferry up on the hill, there's a this Thomas S. R. Cooler.
Mm-hmm.
They were black.
Oh, interesting.
And apparently the wife and the husband had a falling out. And anyway, she murdered him. And had her brother take the body and throw it in the Potomac. Now the ruins of that house are still there. It's just a dent in the ground, but there's still the well there.
Oh, that's interesting. I'd like to go check that out. I haven't heard that story before.
If you go back up Edwards Ferry, from Edwards Ferry, once you leave the parkland, you follow the old road bed, you go about 300 feet, and then it'll be on the riverside, and you'll see the well. So watch it, because it's just covered with sticks.
Oh, okay. Check
My
that
father
out.
used to farm that thing, so that's how I happen to have pictures of that road. And we used to have to go through Summit Hall, where you go straight instead of going up the hill. And then the new owners built a house right in the middle of it.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
doesn't always go through.
right.
That's how we used to get back there. And then once you got onto the Mary Chiswell farm, right there past the gate was a radar station for Dulles Airport. And you
Oh.
could see when the planes were coming into Dulles, they would, as soon as they got near that building, they would suddenly turn.
Huh. Interesting. Didn't know that.
I have a question. Someone mentioned Monocacy Cemetery. We actually went looking for that and we couldn't find it. We rode down 28 from the north, past 109, past the builders there, the McGankys, and past the golf course, Four Streams, and we never did see a cemetery off to the, according to the map, it should have been off to our left.
Yes, it's literally 1 block north of the intersection of 109 and 28.
Oh, it's
And-
north.
Yep, it's north. And it's very difficult to see as a cemetery because it's up on a knoll facing onto the road. So just know that it's West Hunter Road and 28,
Mhm.
So it should be like across the street from where
the Darby
Sh-
store.
Shops used to be.
Right on the same side, 1 block up.
Oh,
North.
same side. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Do we have any more questions? Well, Kenny, I'd just like to thank you again so much for your presentation tonight. It was so fascinating.